And speaking of fires, what's one of the things you should always have with you? A fire extinguisher. Another thing is a first aid kit. I keep a first aid kit in my toolkit at all times. Another thing is, and one of the gentlemen mentioned it here earlier, environmentally, drinking water. You got to stay hydrated, right? Hydrated helps you stay both physically fit and also mentally. Dehydration can contribute to your mental stability, and my wife would say there's no hope for me because I'm too unstable anyway, but that's a different story. Proper clothing and skin protection. Use sunblock if you're out in the sun, right? Common sense stuff, yes, but it's important. Gloves and hand warmers, proper shelter from the elements. These are all things to look for if you're looking at booking an assignment, or what some people might call a mission. These are all things to consider, right? What's it going to be like? What's the environment going to be like at the shoot location? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be windy? Do I need special clothes? Are there other special considerations? Even with hypothermia, a lot of people think about hypothermia in a cold situation like 0 degrees and below, right? But the truth is hypothermia can happen at 40 degrees if you've got a situation where you got people out there who are working, they've got heavy coats on, but not quite heavy enough. So what happens is this coat, they're sweating underneath the coat, and the evaporation from the sweat is causing their body temperature to go down, and the coat isn't heavy enough to keep them warm after that evaporation occurs, and they can literally go into hypothermia at 40 degrees. So it's just something to watch out for. Okay, let's change gears, and let's have a look at some pre-planning things. Getting ready for the mission. The point here is this isn't rocket science, folks. It's pretty common sense stuff, most of it, but it's stuff that you need to know, and not just know, but put into practice. So let me play this video for you.
So many steps go into planning a small UAS mission, from checking weather, location planning, airspace checks, and knowing the performance of our small UAS. Even something as simple as a real estate photo mission requires forethought and communication, always keeping in mind the requirements of Part 107 and the responsibilities that come with being remote pilot in command.
Nothing like an announcer's voice, right? You gotta love it. Okay, weather check is one of the first things you want to do in your pre-planning. Take a look at the weather, and we've talked about this already. Weather can be a real thing for unmanned pilots. Is it, partly sunny? Are there clouds? If so, what's the cloud ceiling? If it's below 900 feet, you've got some things to think about, right? It's going to limit your maximum altitude. Are there winds? What about the temperature? The colder it gets, right, the better your density altitude is. But usually colder temperatures occur at higher altitudes, and therefore your density altitude goes up, which can be a bad thing. So it's kind of a mix, this whole thing about density altitude. It's a little bit of a physics thing that you have to be aware of. Look at the lay of the land. What about getting permission? Do you have to get permission under Part 107? Do you have to get permission from the landowner or property owner? Well, the FAA does not mandate it. It's not a legal requirement. But what I do is I seek on every mission, if I'm dealing with a landowner, and I mean, there aren't many cases, unless you own the land yourself, where you're not going to have to deal with a landowner. I keep a document that I have, a blank permit basically, and it's a document that the landowner can sign saying, I give Jim permission to fly on this property. And if you can't get that for whatever reason, at least try to get a verbal and write down who you get that verbal from in case the FAA or the local police come and say, are you allowed to fly here? Right, so just cover yourself. Let's see, lay of the land obstructions. Oh yeah. So what about obstructions? How do you find out for them? How do you find out in advance? How about sectional charts? In many cases, obstructions are shown. In most cases, permanent obstructions are shown on the sectional charts. And I'll show an example here a little bit later on of a sectional chart, and I'll specifically show you how to recognize an obstruction, okay? But understand the lay of the land. If you're not getting a sectional or some other way to know the lay of the land, what I will often do as a requirement to the day of the shoot, I'll tell my client, look, I have to go scout this. Generally speaking, unless it's a distance that's far away, I may charge the client to travel to a faraway place to scout it. But generally speaking, I don't charge to scout it because it's in my best interest to do so. I want to go scout the location. I want to understand and pre-plan the flight myself. I want to see the obstructions. I want to see where the buildings and trees and power lines are. And if they're antennas, I want to see where the guy wires are. Is there property that I should avoid flying over? Is there a road nearby with active traffic that I can't fly over? Or is there an active sidewalk where there are people that I'm going to have to steer clear of, right? All these things, it's better to know in advance and plan for it than to go out the morning of the shoot and say, oh man, how am I going to pull this off? Right? Because there's some things that you and your client may need to do before the day of the shoot in order to deal with some of these things. So pre-planning is really key. And also the obvious one, the airspace. And this is that before you fly application. These are good pictures actually from the app itself. So it's a good thing, get out to the location. As you stand there, just bring up before you fly, and it'll show you. You can see here on this one, it's showing you where the airspace is and where you are and things to be aware of, okay? So it's a great little app, even for a commercial pilot. It was designed for hobbyists, but it's a great little app for everyone. And speaking of apps, this one's my favorite, Airmaps. Is anybody using it? No, if you're not, you should be. It's free. Get it on your phone. What do we think this red squiggly line is? Any idea? River? Any other? Thunderstorm. Okay, so it's not a river, because they wouldn't show you rivers if you're dealing with airspace issues, right? You don't care where the river is necessarily. It's not a thunderstorm because, unfortunately, this weather does not provide weather information. This is all about airspace and whether you can fly or not. What this is a national park, because national parks are no-fly zones. All U.S. national parks are no-fly zones. That's why it's red. No exceptions, no fly. You can't get a waiver for this. Okay, so this is a national park. I forget the name of it, but it's here. There's another slide with the name of it later on. I put in a couple of my own examples because I wanted to show you a little bit more about what this app looks like on a phone. Yes. The area shown in brown, the question is with the area shown in brown, it's actually in red, but it's hard to tell with this projector. But the area shown in red is a no-fly zone. What about the green? That's just information about the land surrounding it. It's not no-fly zone. You would see other no-fly zones would be indicated, generally speaking, with circles, and if you click on it on the Airmap, it'll tell you what type of airspace it is. So I want to show you this. This is what Airmap looks like on an iPhone, and I actually took this as a snapshot off of my own iPhone. This may look familiar to you because remember we were looking at sectionals earlier, and I showed you the sectional that include LAX and the San Fernando Valley. So this is LAX is down here. This is Van Nuys and Burbank, and Whiteman is in here too. This little square right here. That's Class E space. That's an extension of the Class D space, or is that C? No, that's C, excuse me. No, wait. Van Nuys is D, right? Yeah, it's a Class E extension on the Van Nuys Class D airspace. Okay, that little square there. This is the triangle of airports out in the West Valley that I mentioned: Camarillo, Point Mugu, and the other one. I can never remember the name of them all. Oxnard. Thank you. Okay, and what's this dot here? This is my home right here. That's where I live. Okay, I want to zoom in on that because I want to show you what happens when I zoom in on my home. What do I have? Oops, that didn't work, did it? Sorry about that. Let's try this again. Da, 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 da. Here we go. So zoomed in on the right. This is my home in Tarzana. What's this on the backside of my home? That's the Santa Monica Mountain Reserve. That's a national park. I'm right on the edge, so I have to be careful if I fly from my home. Yeah, that's it. What's this other circle here on above and to the right? The battery's running out on this thing. What's that? Anybody think what that yellow circle is above and to the right of the dot where my home is? It's Van Nuys Airspace. So I'm sandwiched between Van Nuys Airspace and the Santa Monica Mountain Reserve National Park. But there's an area that I can fly in, and when I do my test flights, if I like update the firmware on my drone or something like that, I fly in my cul-de-sac because I can. Okay, but the point is be careful and use these applications. They're great applications. What about longitude and latitude, right? Everybody knows what longitude and latitude is, right? It's the way you measure your position on the globe. The globe, if mapped out, or on a globe, on a circular globe, horizontal lines are latitude. Thank you very much. Vertical lines are longitude. And when you combine the two, you can specify by a series of hours, minutes, and seconds your specific position anywhere in the world, okay? So that's lat and lon, or latitude and longitude. How do we get it? Well, you can get it from a GPS app on your phone. I think Airmap provides it. If you go to the location and stand there and open Airmap, it'll give you the GPS coordinates. If you direct Airmap to a different location that you want to explore that you're not at, it'll give you the GPS coordinate for that location. Another good way to get GPS coordinates is Google. Google Maps will show you GPS coordinates. What else? Sectional charts, of course. Yeah, on sectional charts is a grid that coordinates with lat and lon, and it'll give you hours and minutes, and then you can calculate the seconds if you have to get that accurate depending on what you're doing. But it will give you the hours and minutes on the sectional charts. The other thing about how do you get GPS coordinates, there's an aviation radio, which you really should have. I mean, because remember I talked earlier about listening to the air traffic if you're flying near an airport? As an unmanned pilot, you should seriously consider getting an aviation radio. It's not an FAA requirement unless you're going for an airspace waiver. And then if you apply for an airspace waiver, you're going to want to put in there that I've got an aviation radio, and if I fly near an airport, I'm going to tune it to the control tower frequency, and I'm going to listen to the traffic on that frequency, okay? So I can be aware of aircraft around me. But the point I'm on here relative to GPS is there's an aviation radio out there called the Yaesu FTA 750L. Yaesu is spelled Y-A-E-S-U. FTA, that's 750L. It ain't cheap. It's about $375 or so, but it's got a lot of functions on it. One of the ones I like is the GPS. Okay, so let's set up a scenario here. You get this app called Airmap that red flags this flight. Why? You've got this park. See, I told you I had this park. It's South Mountain Park. Appalachian Trail is the name of this. This thing's dead. Oh well. South Mountain Park Appalachian Trail is the name of this park, and it's not easy to see on the sectional chart, but you can sure see it on Airmap, and it's a no-fly zone. So what are you going to do around here? You're going to be careful about launching and landing because you don't want to, and flying over for that matter, you don't want to do that with the national park. All right, so here's the deal. We're dealing with this national park situation. We're going to set up a scenario. This is about 7 slides worth. We'll go through this and then we'll break for lunch. Can we do it? The scenario is you've got permission from the landowner. It's a farm near the national park, right? So you don't want to fly up the mountain because that's a restricted area near the park. What about other restrictions? This is a working farm. There are multiple buildings on the farm with people living in and or working in and out of these buildings. So can we fly it? And if so, what are we going to do? Help me out. Can we fly this mission? Yes. Yes, we can. But what are some of the caveats? So the point this gentleman is making is that national parks are not a no-fly zone above a certain altitude. I don't know that for sure, but if that's the case, do you know what that altitude is? Full-scale aircraft, right? But the point is that from my knowledge, national parks are a no-drone zone. Period, regardless of what the airspace says on the sectional or whatever that other guideline for manned aircraft may be. For drones, it's just a no-drone zone. Below 2,000, you can't fly. So it's a non-issue for a drone anyway because you can't fly above 400. Okay. The question was, can you ask for permission in a national park? I tried that once. And the answer I got was somewhat vague because I called the park for Santa Monica Mountain National Reserve. I had an opportunity to shoot a real estate shoot at a property that was on the edge of that property in Malibu. It was on the edge of that park in Malibu. And so I contacted the Park Service, and what they told me is no permits. Now, I didn't pursue it any further than that because, as it turns out, the opportunity to shoot this real estate went away. So I don't have a full answer for you, but I would say contact the National Park Service. I'd be surprised if you can't get a permit. I'm talking about the property that I was contemplating shooting was a home property that abutted to, or maybe even was somewhat within the park. Now, interesting to your point, the answer, another part of the answer that came back from the Park Service when I asked the question was, I can take off from and land on the private property. And so I may have been able to accomplish my mission that way, but I can't fly into the park, and I can't take off or land from the park. Okay? Yes, sir. If you're doing, the point is the gentleman is saying if you're doing a real estate shoot on the edge of a park and it's designated real estate shot, you're not going into the park, then that shouldn't be a problem, and you're right, as long as you don't fly into the park. So I'm sorry? You need to get a surveyor. No, there's some gray area there, right? I would fly it, okay? I would just be careful about not flying too far into the what is clearly the park space. Yes, sir, in the back? Okay. That's good to know. The gentleman was saying you can fly a national park if it's on a reservation because you're getting permission from the reservation, and that reservation's authority supersedes the national park. So that's good to know. Thank you for that. Okay, so can we fly it? Yes, but the other thing is we want to be careful of the people, okay? So let's be a little flexible. Let's look at other options. So we go to talk to one of the residents on the property, and they say, well, you know, the reason we go to that resident on the property is, say, look, can you stay inside just for a couple hours while I fly? I don't want to risk you, coming outside and being in danger while I'm flying. And the resident says, I can't because I have to work outside today, but I know an area where you could fly. And it won't conflict with it's an open area. You could get probably the same background that you need for the shot that you want, and it won't conflict with flyover of other non-participants. So great. Thank you for that. Let's go check it out. Now, the question was that the regulation says you can't fly over people. Is that true for animals like horses and sheep? The answer is no. You can fly over animals. You just can't fly over people. I'm sorry? That's not my regulation. He said they can be injured if something goes wrong. Yes, and you're responsible for safety. But I'm just stating the FAA regulations, sir. It's not my fault. Okay, and I'm not going to go kill the animals. I promise. Okay, so we speak to the resident. They recommend another site. Let's go check it out. So video time.
There's a bigger picture concern to all of this, which is that when we're flying, we're essentially serving as ambassadors for the profession to the general public. It's important to realize that as we plan our mission and make sure we are good neighbors.
Nice and short, to the point. Thank you. Okay, so we get to the site, and what do we find? High tension power lines, ugh, right? Is this going to be a problem? I didn't know they were here. Well, how could we have known? Check the sectional, okay? So I threw this in because I wanted you guys to see this. Here's the sectional. We're back now. We've zoomed in to the Los Angeles area sectional that I showed you before, and I'm zoomed into Burbank Class C airspace. And over here in the red circle is what's called a group obstruction. That's what that icon represents. And on every sectional, there's a legend that tells you what all these symbols mean. What are they telling you here with this group obstruction? Can you tell what the altitude is? Can you tell how high that obstruction is? So, thank you. So, and is that AGL or MSL? MSL, thank you. Okay, so 6,634 feet MSL, above mean sea level. That's the altitude of that obstruction, which happens to be the transmission towers that sit on Mount Wilson. What's the number below that in parentheses? 971. What does that tell you? That's AGL measurement for the height of the towers. Those towers are 971 feet tall. Those are high towers, right? So anyway, if in this scenario we had checked the sectionals, we would have known that those towers were there, or could have known, right? The point about towers, and I alluded to this earlier, with towers, one of the biggest issues is not the tower itself, but the guy lines that are spread up on a radial basis. There's always going to be an array radially of guy lines coming down from the tower, right, all around it. And with it, when you're flying your drone, chances are you're not going to see them all. So you got to be really careful. Okay, so that's the point. Be careful. of the guidelines. Oh, guess what? There's another thing to consider in this scenario. Yes, ma'am. So the question is relative to flying over people. I know you can't fly directly over people, but how far away do you need to be? And the FAA Part 107 regulation does not specify a distance. It just says you need to be a safe distance, and that's your judgment as the pilot in command. It has to be a safe distance. Thank you for the question. All right, so are there any nearby airports? Well, no, the nearest airport is about 3 miles away, but the landowner says that he often sees airplanes flying overhead. And it turns out what this is, it's an airspace that's used by a local flight school. So they go up there and they practice all the time. So the question is, can you fly it? It's Class G airspace. Can you fly it? Yes. Yes is the answer. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to be careful? Yes. Would you use your aviation radio? Maybe, yes, thank you. I would, okay? And you just want to be careful because these are student pilots up there flying around, and although they're supposed to stay at a certain altitude, you never know when one of them might dip down, either accidentally or just because. So just something to be aware of. In this case, what this slide is telling you is that you want to monitor the common traffic advisory frequency for that airport. And we'll talk more about airport frequencies in a minute or on a later slide. But the common airport frequency for non-towered airports is called CTAF, for common traffic advisory frequency. And this is for untowered airports, so it's a facility and a common frequency that pilots use to talk to each other and communicate their position relative to the airport. If one of them is coming in for a landing, they're going to broadcast a call to tell other pilots in the area where they are relative to the airport and the fact that they're getting ready to land. And speaking of traffic patterns, just wanted to show you this. There is something in the manned aviation world called a standard traffic pattern. And the standard traffic pattern is called the left pattern because it goes counterclockwise or to the left. If you look at this slide and the pattern shown, all of the, and I'm going to turn my back to you because I want you to see what this is counterclockwise. So all of these turns are being made in a counterclockwise direction or to the left. Okay, so this is your entry leg. This is called your downwind leg, right? And why would this be called the downwind leg? Because when you land in this direction, you want to be flying into the wind or upwind, right? So entry, downwind, this is called the base leg. This is the last leg you make before you, and it's perpendicular to the upwind leg or the approach leg, right? So the base leg is the last leg you have before you make your turn into final approach. So if you know this information and get it embedded in your brain about these standard traffic patterns, then when you listen to CTAF and you're monitoring traffic and somebody says, I am at 1,000 feet left downwind of Whiteman Airport. Now, Whiteman Airport's a towered airport, so they would be talking to ATC actually, but let's just say it's an untowered airport. I'm 1,000 feet left downwind of Whiteman Airport. Where would I be? I'd be over here where the plane is, right? Left downwind. Sounds a little bit screwy because it's to the right of the runway as viewed from this view, but the runway is to the pilot's left, and it's in a standard traffic pattern, meaning he's going to make all his turns to the left. I know that's somewhat confusing and it's a lot of information, but it's something that you should know because if you're flying near an airport, it's good information to have. Okay? All right, so Is Jay in the room? No? Is he in the bathroom? No, he's not hiding. I want to find out what we're going to do for lunch before I break you guys. How are we doing so far, by the way? Are we doing okay? Yeah? Is it pertinent? Is it what? Are you getting what you came for? Okay, good. Yes, sir. So I apologize for this. I don't mean to exclude you guys, but I want to report to you what we're talking about because it's an interesting series of questions that the gentleman had. The question was, the scenario is I'm shooting cinematography on a movie set, and I have an airspace authorization that I've waited for 90 days to obtain from the FAA to shoot on this day, and it turns out on that day it's raining. What do I do? You know what? You're screwed. Because you have to go back. I think the gentleman the answer you wanted me to give you was the FAA will allow you to change it to another day, but that's not the answer. It's one day, one time, one location only. And if you get a weather restriction at that day, time, and location for an airspace authorization that you have, all bets are off, baby, and you got to go reapply again on the FAA website. You may have to wait another 60 to 90 days. Now, what the FAA has told us, and I mentioned this earlier, there's this facility called LANC, L-A-A-N-C, and I forget, it's like low altitude something capability. How they come up with these acronyms, I don't know. But it's going to be an online system where theoretically you could go online, request authorization, and get it almost instantaneously. That's sometime in the future, but I don't know when. How about getting one for every day? I talked about that earlier. That's a waiver versus an authorization. Remember what I said, an authorization is for one day, time, and location. A waiver for airspace, you can apply for them. There are very few of them granted. And remember I mentioned that I have 5 of them in progress right now? So the waiver says it gives you permission with certain restrictions, but not as many as the current blanket restriction that says you can't fly in Class C airspace, period. The waiver will say, okay, if you want to fly close to Burbank Airport, you can fly at 300 feet within a 2 nautical mile, outside of a 2 nautical mile radius. If you get closer than that, you have to go to 100 feet within a 1 mile radius, and you can't fly at all at Burbank within a mile. Okay, that's often what will happen is they'll grade it based on proximity to the airport when it comes back as an airspace waiver. So I'm gonna, we can continue this, but I need to get us a break for lunch.